We are in a world of adverse competition and increasing governance uncertainty, where we once strived to ask what's right under the international law. Today,
we are witnessing the unapologetic rise of national might to settle disputes. This is a truly dark and dangerous path
that threatens the hard-won, rules-based international order we collectively agreed on as UN member states. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while we should be focused strategically on accomplishing the Sustainable Development Goals and leaving no one behind by 2030, the number of fragile states and populations living in poverty is increasing globally. Over 30 member states of the UN today, including my country, Somalia, are classified as a fragile, conflict-affected because of both conflict and social and institutional fragility. When you add the vulnerability stemming from climate change, this number is frightening higher. In addition to this, urbanization is rising at the fastest rate in the human history because of conflict, climate, and lack of economic opportunities in rural communities. Furthermore, food insecurity remains a persistent, deadly challenge affecting billions. According to the World Food Programme, 319 million people are facing acute hunger
in 67 countries today. These stark and startling facts must give us all pause for reflection and thought. If we, as a community of nations, are serious about achieving common progress and prosperity for all,
as envisioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, we must redouble efforts to strengthen multilateralism, solidarity, and shared action for all our people and planet. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Somalia, as a broad non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, is working tirelessly to promote the ideals and the values of peace, stability, and shared opportunities across the world. We are actively working with all Security Council members and wider UN membership to find solutions for peace in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Somalia remains deeply concerned by the continued suffering of the Palestinian people. The ongoing violence, displacement, and deprivation faced in the occupied territories, including Gaza, demand our collective conscience and urgent action. We call for an immediate and lasting ceasefire, unhindered humanitarian access, and renewed commitment towards the two-state solution as the only viable path for a just and lasting peace in the Middle East today. Somalia Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Somalia is a unique history of decisive transition from conflict to a brighter socio-economic and political and security future. Starting from 2012 is the history of a real national effort supported by truly committed international partners, many of whom are represented in this room today. Council during our membership, because we know that we are truly better together. When we all work in unison at home, we are bravely fighting the last remaining pockets of international terrorism while building a strong and sustainable national security architecture. We are working closely with all our valuable international partners in defeating the violence, extremism, ideology, falsehoods, and illicit financial systems that facilitate global terrorism. As a result of our efforts in Somalia, our people and citizens across the world are safe today. Of course, while we remain grateful for all international support to combat terrorism, I strongly commend the unwavering commitment and courage of Somali security forces and the local community defense forces for their sacrifices, resilience, and success against Al-Shabaab and ISIS, the two most dangerous terror organizations in the world today. This will continue until we achieve complete victory and harmony in our country, our region, our continent, and the wider world. We must never give in to cowardly terrorists. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our government has embarked on a historic journey to undertake universal suffrage elections in Somalia for the first time in 57 years. Somalia was Africa's first democratic nation in the 1960s, and we are proudly returning to that path of inclusive governance once again. Today, our national election registration process is ongoing, and more than 40 independent political associations have registered to participate in the upcoming elections. Our national experience is that nothing is better than a people-centered, a people-led, guided by the rule of law to build a unified and prosperous nation in our country. Financing development, the sustainable development goals are the blueprint for achieving dignity, justice, and equality through real investment in human capital, job creation, and social protection for the most vulnerable in all our communities. However, it was very clear from the fourth financing for development conference in Seville earlier this year that the financing gap between our ambitions and the reality are very far apart. Today, developing nations are facing the terrible shock of high debt burden, higher cost of sovereign borrowing, and expenditure on recurrent shocks, which is impossible to budget for annually. The traditional economic model of forecasting predictable expenditure supported by clear revenue streams is no longer this simple. Governments of the developing nations are also now subjected to real-time investment cuts in core developmental activities, including health, education, and basic infrastructure. This is because of realignment of the already dwindling development assistance they use to receive from the developing nations. This is not sustainable, and if we as a community of nations are to achieve collective developmental progress together, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in Somalia, we are taking responsibility of our own economic development by building on the successes of our recent reform based on the debt relief. Today, we are focused on mitigating the excruciating cost of public service investment by continuously raising domestic revenue, strengthening public financial management systems, and enforcing strict expenditure controls while enhancing transparency and accountability. Furthermore, we are committed to benefiting from strategic location and natural resources through trade with our region and the world. In line support of this ambition, Somalia has joined the East Africa Community and is ratifying the African Continental Free Trade Area policies and joining World Trade Organization. Process is going on very well. Climate emergency, we are also resolute in our commitment to combat the devastating impact of climate change in the most vulnerable communities, especially those who are unable to mitigate and adapt effectively. Climate change is wreaking havoc across the world, with the most vulnerable countries suffering systemic and repetitive meteorological and socio-economic shocks. These devastating economies, destroying livelihoods and diverting limited public resources towards mitigating and adaptation responses, which take away from other vital social investment like education and health. The impact of climate change is forcing governments in developing countries, including my own, to make impossible financial trade-offs, which hamper our own aspiration for investing in resilience and development. Around 10% of the developing nations' budgets are diverted to responding to climate change. This needs to be addressed urgently through developed industrialized nations by meeting their financial obligations for climate crisis they continue to exacerbate. The climate crisis that continue to exacerbate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the resilient Somali people live with the climate crisis every day. For us, climate change is not an abstract. It is a horrible reality of disrupted and destroyed lives. Somalia's contribution contributes almost nothing to global emission, yet we endure some of the harshest consequences. Droughts, floods, and rising seas erode livelihoods and displace families, threatening to undo the progress we are making towards peace and development. As a government, we understand that addressing the adverse impact of climate change is a global public good that requires strong partnership and genuine burden sharing. On our part, Somalia has adopted the national climate change policy, updated our national determined contribution, and is preparing its first biennial transparency report. We are also developing a robust national climate finance strategy to guide how we mobilize and manage resources to address the challenge. To ensure these resources are used effectively, we have established the National Climate Fund, a dedicated institution to channel climate financing transparently and directly to the communities on the ground, to the communities on the ground. We are restoring degraded lands, strengthening water security, and piloting nature-based solutions that protect both people and ecosystems. Despite our efforts, accessing climate finance remains too slow and complex. As our government strengthens its domestic revenue capacity and initiates the process for pre-arranging disaster risk financing, we call for financial support that is accessible, affordable, predictable, and just from the international financing institutions and capital markets. Nations on the front line, like Somalia, cannot be left to face this crisis alone, unsupported by the dominant global financial architecture, which is not fit for the purpose in this age of great challenge. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the 80th anniversary of the UN General Assembly is the best possible opportunity to take stock of our global achievement as far as our common commitments to sustainable development are concerned. We quietly transitioned from the Millennium Development Goals to now the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I wonder, with the clock rapidly ticking very fast towards 2030, what the next acronyms of our global development aspirations will be. For us, being better together means common ownership, common responsibility, and genuine partner sharing on the global achievement of sustainable development through investment in a resilient and fair future for all. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. And now the Assembly will hear an address of His Excellency Jakob Milatović, President of Montenegro. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey my warmest congratulations to Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock on her election as the President of the 80th session of the General Assembly. This election is both historic and inspiring, as she is only the 5th woman entrusted with this very high responsibility. We recall Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit from India, who spoke with the voice of a liberated Asia. Angie Brooks, a Liberian diplomat and a judge who championed the rights of small states and women in Africa. Haya Rashid Al Khalifa from Bahrain, who brought a message of dialogue and international law from the heart of the Middle East. And Maria Fernanda Espinosa from Ecuador, who raised her voice for climate action and indigenous people of Latin America. And each of them left a mark of their time. So this election gives Europe the opportunity to embody the principles of the unwavering defense of human rights and multilateralism. Dear colleagues, this year, as we commemorate 80 years since the founding of the United Nations, we reflect on the remarkable journey of this great organization that was created as a mission of global peace. Born from the ashes of the Second World War, the United Nations emerged as a beacon of hope for humanity. Dear colleagues, imagine the devastated cities throughout the world back in 1945. Warsaw, reduced to ashes. St. Petersburg, shattered after the years of the siege. Berlin, in ruins. Hiroshima and Nagasaki struck by the unimaginable horror. And my hometown and the current capital of Montenegro, Podgorica, was also in the bombings virtually razed to the ground. And imagine at the same time the world leaders gathered, who despite their wounds looked to the future. And at that very moment, when the trenches between nations still existed and the graves of the loved ones were still fresh, the Organization of the United Nations was born. The idea that light could emerge from darkness and that solidarity could triumph over despair. Despite the unprecedented destruction, the idea of peace and unity triumphed over division and hostility. The leaders of that time understood the urgent need for a strong global organization capable of preventing all future wars and fostering cooperation among nations. As part of the former Yugoslavia, Montenegro was among the founding nations of the United Nations. We have so far established an international system that promotes peace, upholds rules-based global order, safeguards human rights, and fosters sustainable development. Dear colleagues, without the United Nations, much of our collective progress would have remained just a distant dream. Yet, even after 8 decades, we must also acknowledge a sobering truth. The absence of the World War has not always meant the presence of genuine peace and prosperity in the world. Today, multilateralism is being tested like never before, and our world is confronted with devastating conflicts, rising polarization, grave human rights violations, deep economic inequalities, and the corrosive spread of disinformation. Those challenges remind us of one essential fact. We cannot afford the marginalization of the United Nations, nor the silencing of the international law. Dear colleagues, now more than ever, we need to renew our commitment to the founding principles of the UN Charter. And despite its imperfections, the United Nations remains the only global organization where every nation has a seat and a voice, and where international law remains the basis for international legitimacy. And that makes the United Nations indispensable. Ladies and gentlemen, since regaining our independence back in 2006, Montenegro worked hand in hand with the United Nations to advance reforms in sustainable development, human rights and good governance, and in line with our European Union membership aspirations. Next year, we will proudly mark 2 decades of regaining our independence, as well as 2 decades of our UN membership. So over the past 20 years, Montenegro has evolved into a modern democracy. This transformation is also reflected in our economy, which has grown steadily, driven by key sectors such as tourism and energy. Our resilience has been tested by many global crises. Yet, Montenegro remains firmly committed to building a knowledge-based economy that fosters sustainable development and contributes to regional stability and regional prosperity. Montenegro's commitment to the United Nations and multilateralism remains a cornerstone of our foreign policy, fully in harmony with our European and Euro-Atlantic paths, and our dedication to good neighborly relations and regional cooperation. With NATO membership as the pillar of our security, our strategic focus is now on joining the European Union by 2028. It's an ambitious goal, dear colleagues, yet one that is now firmly within our reach. And as the most advanced EU candidate country, Montenegro remains steadfast in implementing structural reforms and fully aligned with the European Union's common foreign and security policy. We are convinced that the EU integration is a catalyst for lasting progress, stability, and ultimately security of the European continent. And in this process, Montenegro is not only a beneficiary, but also a contributor, demonstrating that enlargement strengthens the European Union as much as it strengthens the candidate countries. Your Excellencies, to strengthen multilateralism, we also must confront its weaknesses. The Security Council is increasingly paralyzed and unable to fulfill its mandate as the primary guardian of peace and security. The latest example is the war in Ukraine, which has brought unimaginable suffering to the people of Ukraine. And Montenegro welcomes recent diplomatic efforts of the international community led by the United States aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace. And we sincerely hope that these efforts will succeed. At the same time, Montenegro is deeply concerned about the unfolding humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And we call for an immediate ceasefire. Montenegro also strongly condemned the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, and calls for unconditional release of all hostages. Montenegro has consistently supported a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on the two-state solution in full accordance with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. And this is why we also endorsed the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. Dear colleagues, dear delegates, Montenegro fully supports the implementation of the UN Pact for the Future as well as the Seville Compromise, a renewed global commitment for financing sustainable development as important steps in strengthening our collective capacity to respond to global challenges. And we also believe that the upcoming second World Summit for Social Development must move decisively beyond reflection and analysis and deliver concrete, tangible solutions that will improve lives of people across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, back in 1991, Montenegro proudly became the world's first ecological state, a milestone that proclaimed our commitment to the highest principles of environmental protection, the preservation of nature, and the pursuit of sustainable development. UN Agenda 2030 remains our guiding light for sustainable development. And Montenegro takes pride in being among the first countries in the world to integrate all the SDGs into its national framework almost a decade ago. A further important step in advancing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda was the creation of the SDG Acceleration Fund, a powerful mechanism for financing SDG goals. Ladies and gentlemen, for Montenegro, the priority is clear, which is to create conditions that will enable our young people to build their future at home, offering them equal opportunities to thrive. And by insisting on the value of knowledge and ensuring equal access to education, we strive to reduce inequalities and empower our citizens to reach their full potential. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change must be tackled globally and urgently. And it is no longer just warnings from the scientists. It is floods that swallow villages and cities, fires that destroy forests, fields, and homes, and delaying a more decisive action on the international scale means gambling with the lives of those who live today, but also of the future generations. Dear colleagues, rapid technological change, and particularly the rise of the artificial intelligence, must be harnessed in a safe, responsible, and inclusive manner. Technology should be an evolutionary gift to humanity, developed, founded, and guided with social responsibility, serving the greater good. Ladies and gentlemen, globally, human rights and fundamental freedoms continue to face serious challenges. And while significant progress has been achieved in advancing women's rights since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration, much remains to be done. In this regard, Montenegro is fully committed to gender equality. We have harmonized national policies with the best international standards, strengthened our institutions dedicated to the protection of women's rights, and promoted women's leadership in all spheres of our society. Your Excellencies, as we celebrate today 80 years of shared achievements, our collective task is to reform the United Nations and prepare it for the challenges and opportunities of the future. Criticism of the UN reflects not just on the organization itself, but on all of us as member states. For it is we who have created it, who guide it, and who bear responsibility to strengthen it. This is why Montenegro strongly supports the Secretary General's reform initiative, UN 80. It must not be seen as a mere bureaucratic exercise, but embraced as a commitment, a solemn commitment that the United Nations of tomorrow will be more agile and more efficient. And at the heart of these efforts must remain the UN's three key pillars: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights, as the bedrock of all United Nations action. To conclude, dear friends, Montenegro is firm in its conviction that the United Nations must remain the cornerstone of peace, international law must prevail over force, and the rule-based order must be further strengthened. For without these principles, there can be no trust among nations, no true security, and no hope for a just and lasting peace in the world. And let me, at the end, quote the most famous writer from our part of the world and the Nobel Prize laureate, Ivo Andrić, who wrote in his masterpiece, The Bridge on the River Drina, of everything that man erects and builds in his urge for living, nothing is, in my eyes, better and more valuable than bridges. They are more important than houses, more sacred than temples, for they belong to all and are equal for everyone. Dear colleagues, this timeless truth reminds us that bridges are not only structures of stone, but structures of peace. It is a dialogue that builds bridges, and it is only through bridges that nations can walk towards peace. So our task is not to be passive heirs of history, but active builders of a better legacy. So let the next 80 years of the United Nations be not years of hesitation, but of courage and solidarity. So guided by these values, Montenegro will continue to build bridges, strengthen dialogue, and work tirelessly towards a future of stability, future of progress, and future of common success, fully aligned with the very spirit and mission of the United Nations. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Montenegro. In accordance with Resolution 80/1 of 19 September 2025, I give the floor to the distinguished observer of the Observer State of Palestine to introduce an address by the head of the state.
Bismillahir-Rahman-Rahim.
In the name of God the Merciful, the Compassionate, Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, Highnesses, and Heads of Delegations, may the mercy and blessings of God be upon you. I speak to you today after almost 2 years in which our Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip have been facing a war of genocide, destruction, starvation, and displacement waged by the Israeli occupation forces, in which they killed and injured more than 220,000 Palestinians, the majority of whom are unarmed children, women, and the elderly. A war in which they displaced hundreds of thousands and prevented the entry of food and medical supplies and caused the starvation of 2 million Palestinians. They imposed a stifling siege on an entire people and destroyed more than 80% of homes, schools, hospitals, churches, mosques, facilities, and infrastructure. What Israel is carrying out is not merely an aggression. It is a war crime and a crime against humanity that is both documented and monitored, and it will be recorded in history books and the pages of international conscience as one of the most horrific chapters of humanitarian tragedy in the 20th and 21st centuries. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the capital of the State of Palestine, the extremist Israeli government continues to implement its settlement policies through illegal settlement expansion and developing projects for annexing settlements. The latest was the construction plan for E1, which would divide the West Bank into 2 parts and would isolate occupied Jerusalem from its surroundings and would undermine the option of the two-state solution in a blatant violation of international law and relevant Security Council resolutions, specifically Resolution 2334. Furthermore, the Israeli Prime Minister announced a plan for what he calls Greater Israel, which we reject and completely deplore, and which involves expanding into sovereign Arab states. In addition to the brutal attack against the sisterly state of Qatar, which we condemn and see as an escalation that is grave and a blatant violation of international law, which requires a decisive intervention and deterring procedures and measures for such expansionary plans. With official support and through increasing facilities, the terrorism of settlers increases. They burn homes and fields, they uproot trees and attack villages and attack unarmed Palestinian civilians. In fact, they kill them in broad daylight under the protection of the Israeli occupation army. Furthermore, the Islamic and Christian religious sites in Jerusalem, Hebron, and Gaza Strip have not been spared the attacks which have damaged the mosques, churches, and cemeteries in a blatant violation of the historic status quo and in a clear violation of the provisions of the international law. Despite all what our people have suffered, we reject what Hamas carried out on the 7th of October. These actions that targeted Israeli civilians and took them hostages, because these actions do not represent the Palestinian people, nor do they represent their just struggle for freedom and independence. We have affirmed, and we will continue to affirm, that the Gaza Strip is an integral part of the state of Palestine, and that we are ready to bear full responsibility for governance and security there. Hamas will not have a role to play in governance. Hamas and other factions will have to hand over their weapons to the Palestinian National Authority as part of a process to build the institutions of a one state, one law, and one legal security forces. We reiterate that we do not want an armed state. Ladies and gentlemen, our wounds are deep and our calamity is great. 7 million Palestinians are still living the tragedies of the Nakba and displacement since 1948. Our people in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and in the Gaza Strip, are still living the tragedies of the Israeli aggression and occupation for decades. Years that our people have spent under occupation, killing, arrests, and settlement, and the theft of money, property, and lands. And this still continues without any deterrent or accountability. Years of oppression, deprivation, and the protection for the occupier, and enabling the occupier instead of protecting the people under the occupation, and more violations of the rights of our Palestinian people to self-determination, to freedom, dignity, independence, and sovereignty on the land of the occupied state, on the land of the state of Palestine occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem. More than 1,000 resolutions at the United Nations, not one of them was implemented. There have been many efforts, many international initiatives, without reaching an end to this tragic situation that the Palestinian people are living under the yoke of occupation. In 1993, we signed the Oslo Accords, and we adhered to all its items, and we recognized the state of Israel. Israel, at the time, recognized the Palestine Liberation Organization as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Based on that, we restructured our institutions, and we amended our national charter, and we rejected violence and terrorism, and we adopted a culture of peace. We made all our efforts to build the institutions of a modern Palestinian state that lives side by side in peace and security with Israel. But Israel did not adhere to the signed agreements and has worked systematically on undermining them. Ladies and gentlemen, just 3 days ago, we met at a high-level international conference in New York under the joint chairmanship of France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with wide-scale international presence and united positions that expressed a genuine international will to put an end to this historic conflict by recognizing the state of Palestine, ending the occupation, and returning hope to both the Palestinian and Israeli people. And here I would like to, on behalf of the Palestinian people, to express our gratitude and appreciation to all the states that recently recognized the state of Palestine and those that intend to recognize the state of Palestine soon. We urge all the states that have not done so yet to recognize the state of Palestine. We call on supporting Palestine obtaining full membership in the United Nations. It should be noted that we have already recognized Israel's right to exist in 1988 and in 1993, and we still recognize this right. In this regard, we would like to thank France, the UK, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Portugal, Luxembourg, Malta, Monaco, San Marino, Andorra, and Denmark for their recognition of the state of Palestine. We would like to thank all 149 states which had previously recognized the state of Palestine. Our people will not forget this noble position. We would also like to commend the role of the chairmanship of this conference, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France, and also the United Kingdom. We would also like to thank all the states that headed the various working groups and those which participated and continue to participate in the International Alliance for Peace. We would also like to thank the states that are supporting our efforts to stop the genocide and the occupation and achieve peace. We highly appreciate all the peoples and organizations around the world who protested in support of the rights of the Palestinian people to freedom and independence and to stop the war, destruction, and starvation. We reject confusing the solidarity with the Palestinian cause and the issue of anti-Semitism, which is something that we reject based on our values and principles. Within the framework of welcoming the outcomes of the International Conference for Peace, we reiterate today before the General Assembly the following points. First, the need for an immediate and permanent end to the war in Gaza. Second, the entry without conditions of humanitarian aid through United Nations organizations, including the UNRWA, and to stop using starvation as a weapon. And here we would like to thank the brotherly and friendly states and organizations that have been sending aids. Third, the release of all hostages and prisoners on both sides. Fourth, the complete withdrawal of the occupation from the Gaza Strip and the rejection of the plans for displacement and putting an end to settlement, the terrorism of settlers, and the theft of Palestinian lands and property under the headline of annexation, and stopping the aggression against the status quo in holy sites. These are all unilateral actions that undermine the two-state solution in Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. Fifth, the state of Palestine should take their full responsibility, starting with the Administrative Committee for the Gaza Strip, which is chaired by a minister in the Palestinian government, to manage the affairs of the Gaza Strip for a temporary period, and then to connect that with the West Bank, all through Arab and international support and with Arab and international presence to protect civilians in Gaza and support the Palestinian forces under the umbrella of the United Nations rather than being a replacement. Sixth, to guarantee that the residents of the Gaza Strip remain on their lands without displacement. and to implement a recovery and reconstruction plan in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Seventh, releasing the Palestinian tax money that is being held by the State of Israel unjustly, and lifting the economic siege and the barriers from the Palestinian cities, villages, and refugee camps. Eighth, supporting our national efforts towards reform and conducting presidential and parliamentary elections within a year after the end of the war. The practical procedures has begun. A committee has been assigned to draft a temporary constitution, and it will end its work within 3 months, so that we move from authority to state. We want a modern and democratic state that abides by international law, the rule of law, and multilateralism, and the peaceful transition of power. And we are extremely keen to empower women and the youth. Ninth, we declare that we are ready to work with US President Donald Trump and with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France, the United Nations, and all partners to implement the peace plan that was approved in the conference that was held on the 22nd of September in a way that would lead towards a just peace and regional cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, today we say clearly, peace cannot be achieved if justice is not achieved. And there can be no justice if Palestine is not freed. We want to live in freedom, security, and peace like all other people on earth, in an independent, sovereign state on the borders of 1967, with East Jerusalem as our capital, in security and peace with our neighbors. We want a modern civilian state that is free of violence, weapons, and extremism, one that respects law, human rights, and invests in people, development, technology, and education, not in wars and conflict. The time has come for the international community to do right by the Palestinian people so that they may obtain their legitimate rights to be rid of the occupation and to not remain a hostage to the temperament of Israeli politics, which denies our rights and continue in their injustice, oppression, and aggression. We are continuing to move forward, and we will continue our peaceful, legal, and diplomatic fight to obtain our rights. In conclusion, we say to our sons and daughters in the homeland, in the exile, and in the diaspora, no matter how much our wounds bleed, and no matter how long the suffering lasts, it will not break our will to live and survive. The dawn of freedom will emerge, and the flag of Palestine will fly high in our skies as a symbol of dignity, steadfastness, and being free from the yoke of occupation. Palestine is ours. Jerusalem is the jewel of our heart and our eternal capital. We will not leave our homeland. We will not leave our lands. Our people will remain rooted like the olive trees, firm as the rocks. We will rise from under the rubble to rebuild and to send from our blessed and holy land the messages of hope and the sound of truth and right, and build the bridges of just peace for the people of our region and the entire world. May the peace and mercy and blessings of God be upon you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine. The Assembly will hear an address now by His Excellency Rashad Mohammed Al-Alimi, President of the Presidential Leadership Council of the Republic of Yemen. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. My statement today will be entitled, For Yemen, for the World. Your Majesties, Your Excellencies, Your Highnesses, Madam President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates. I would first like to offer Madam Annalena Baerbock and her friendly country, the Federal Republic of Germany, I'd like to offer them our sincere congratulations on her election as President of the United Nations General Assembly. I wish her success in leading this session, which we attach great importance to as under the slogan, Better Together for Peace, Development and Human Rights. I would also like to commend the efforts of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres. We look forward to working with these two leaders of the United Nations to champion peace and human rights in Yemen and to offer protection to the relief staff that have been kidnapped by the terrorist Houthi militias that are backed by the Iranian regime. I also take this opportunity to offer our sincere congratulations to our great Yemeni people who tonight are celebrating the anniversary of the overthrow of the racist Imamate regime 63 years ago and the birth of the republic that is based on the principles of liberty, justice, and abolishing differences and class discrimination and encouraging the participation of women and guaranteeing rights and liberties. Ladies and gentlemen, within this organization, which was built in the aftermath of a horrific war, humanity 8 decades ago pledged that no people would be left alone to face dictatorship or chaos or famine without the backing of the international community. You pledged, and we pledged along, that this organization will safeguard human dignity and the rights of peoples to live in dignity, security, development, and peace. And today, after all these years have passed, we pose to you the same fateful question from the Yemeni people, whether these values and principles continue to exist or not, or else what would it mean for our country to be left hostage to the Iranian regime's expansionist schemes and its militias that use hunger as a weapon, religion as a tool, and maritime passages as a means of blackmail? What does it mean for this country with an ancient history to become one of the most dangerous hotspots of terrorism, cross-border terrorism in the world? Therefore, we are here today not simply to speak of the epic confrontation of the Yemeni people against the most violent and arrogant of terrorist organizations at all. Rather, we are here to build on what was achieved and to call on the world once again to take action and not simply to take note, and to achieve the salvation that we have promised our people, not simply a repetition of statements of the past. Ladies and gentlemen, Yemen today is not simply a domestic crisis. Rather, it is a test of the credibility of the international organization. After a decade has passed to the coup that was orchestrated by the Houthi militias supported by the Iranian regime against the national consensus, our people are living one of the gravest humanitarian crises, facing security threats that transcend our borders and spread to the region and the entire world. The Houthi militias are no longer a rebel group in a remote area in the country. Rather, the Houthi militias are an international terrorist organization armed to the teeth with an advanced Iranian arsenal, including ballistic missiles and drones and booby-trapped boats and sea mines and fissile projectiles and other qualitative weapons that are internationally banned. In addition, this outlaw group supports networks that smuggle drugs and utilize new technologies to disrupt communications and guidance systems in an attempt to transform Yemen into a laboratory to experiment with the weapons of its supporters. These are not simply tools of war. Rather, this is a scheme to redraw the map of Iranian influence in the region. And those who are lenient with this group today must imagine how tomorrow will be when the Red Sea and maritime passengers fall prey permanently to this terrorism. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the past years have proven that the policy of conflict management, by offering more incentives, has only brought more disaster and destruction. Moreover, the policy of containment has given the Houthi militias the time and the resources to further expand its arsenal. The United Nations was unable to protect its own staff who were kidnapped in Sana'a, unable to protect the oil installations and the commercial ships. It has become clear that the peace we seek cannot be asked for, but must be imposed by force. Ladies and gentlemen, it has become incumbent upon the world today to reconsider its position on the Yemeni situation. On the one side, there is a widespread national front that believes in international legitimacy and adopts the values of partnership and democracy and maintains local diversity and popular participation and works on building the institutions of a state. This is the front that I represent today, myself and my brothers, the members of the Presidential Council and the government, which is a member of the United Nations and represents all Yemenis, men and women alike. In return, we have an exclusionary, sectarian, fascist organization that does not believe in the principles of international legitimacy and which conducts cross-border terrorism and adopts an authoritarian theocracy that is opposed to human rights, which is embodied by the Houthis and their supporters. Unfortunately, the disregard by many of the essence of the Yemeni crisis has encouraged the Houthi militias to go further in threatening peace regionally and internationally and targeting energy sources and maritime passages and even kidnapping and abusing United Nations staff. Ladies and gentlemen, I have spoken to you from this podium in the past. And at the time, I asserted that the government of the Republic of Yemen is always ready to embrace a comprehensive peace, even if that includes making painful concessions, as long as they come in the interest of the Yemeni people. However, and after our efforts to maintain peace have failed, it has become necessary to move collectively and firmly to impose peace. Therefore, I call on you today to form an effective international coalition to restore security and stability to Yemen, a coalition that would rebuild the institutions of the state and would liberate the country from the clutches of the militias and all forms of terrorist groups. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations General Assembly, in its 80th session, seems to be in dire need to prove to its members that international law is not simply a myth, and that the rules-based international order is not simply a selective call. Yemen and Gaza, in this context, are the moral testing ground of this important organization. They are the place where we can definitely confirm that the might of right is still able to confront the right of might. And here, the Palestinian cause lies in the heart of this issue as a wound that continues to bleed, and the central cause of the Arab people, which is now also witnessing an important transformation. So the overwhelming recognition of an independent state. And here we would like to express our sincere gratitude to our brothers and sisters in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for their efforts, along with their French partners, to achieve these unprecedented political gains. We'd also like to confirm here our full support for the Palestinian Authority and the two-state solution in accordance with international legitimacy resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. And we call upon the rest of the member states to recognize Palestine and to support the rights of its people and their dignity. And at the same time, we reiterate our rejection of the use by outlaw militias of this just cause that has, as a trading card, which has only brought Palestine more isolation and destruction. Your Majesties, Excellencies, and Highnesses, in the midst of this suffering of the Yemeni people that has lasted for 11 years, our brethren have not left us alone, namely the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, who have not only worked to protect the Yemeni state from collapse, but for the entire region from falling into the clutches of the Iranian scheme. They have presented a practical model of strategic partnership based on development. The world must adopt this model and not simply watch it. At the end of last week, our brothers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia once again announced additional economic aid to the country's budget and basic services at a time when the Yemeni government is facing extreme financial bottlenecks. And we hope that the international community would join this effort so that we could keep millions of Yemenis alive. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the title of my statement today was For Yemen, for the World. We are not calling upon you today to simply work for Yemen, but for the entire world. Yemen must not be left to fall prey for blackmail and terrorism, because this would mean opening the door to more victims, and this would deliver a blow to the credibility of this organization and its principles. What we ask from you are not new statements, but international action, firm international action to support the legitimate government as a trusted partner on the ground. The time has come to launch an international coalition that will liberate Yemen from terrorism and rebuild its national state, and would guarantee the security and the security of the region and the world from the dangers of cross-border terrorism. And this is what we call for, to regain sovereignty in our country and put an end to the chapter of militias once and for all. I thank you, and peace and God's blessings be upon you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Presidential Leadership Council of the Republic of Yemen. The Assembly will hear now an address by Her Excellency Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova, President of the Republic of North Macedonia. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Honorable Member President of the United Nations General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, Distinguished Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, esteemed Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Being the foundation of international law and multilateralism, the United Nations have prevented another world war and numerous conflicts and have alleviated the consequences of many humanitarian crises. They have helped many nations embark on the path to sovereign equality, lifted millions of extreme poverty, and educated entire generations. They have inspired a global movement for rights and freedoms, for social justice and equality. They have raised awareness of environmental protection and mobilized humanity in the fight against climate change. For these and many other achievements, the United Nations, its agencies and leaders, have won no less than 12 Nobel Peace Prizes. Nevertheless, the United Nations today face a geopolitical and geoeconomic earthquake that is shaking the foundations of the post-World War II order. Today's crises stem from deep tectonic shifts, undermining the principles that shaped the world for the past 80 years. A new geopolitical era is emerging before our eyes. Instead of acting together on the urgent challenges such as peace and security, climate change and environmental destruction, artificial intelligence and growing inequalities, we seem to be heading towards a post-Hobbesian state of war of everyone against themselves. Instead of a single international order, parallel orders seem to be emerging, each with its own rules, values and interests, often directly against one another. Being paralyzed and isolated when most needed, I wonder if the United Nations is turning into the League of Nations. The signs are all around us. Instead of creating a sense of shared future, humanity is facing wars and loss of humanness. With international humanitarian law increasingly ignored, hunger is weaponized and humanitarian workers are targeted. Amid everyday violence, the world is oscillating between nihilistic pessimism and hedonistic escapism, between hopeless lamentation and heartless indifference, as in the first decades of the 20th century. The tremors of the international order have opened deep geopolitical fault lines. One of the most active is in Ukraine, where war has been raging for 3.5 years. Russia's aggression is a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and a direct threat to international peace and security. We also express our deep concern of the recent violations of the airspace of Poland, Romania and Estonia, every one of them a NATO member state. We supported the joint statement of September 12 and call for immediate de-escalation, full respect for international law, and use of preventive diplomacy to reduce tensions and preserve peace. Your Excellencies, the geopolitical fault line also runs through the Western Balkans region. The Macedonian accession process to the European Union has been continuously obstructed for 20 years, but not on the basis of objective Copenhagen criteria, but for subjective nationalistic reasons. The latest EU condition to start our negotiations is a new imposed amendment to the Constitution. The Constitution, lex superior and, in Rousseau's sense, a social contract between citizens, represents the most internal matter of any state. Our Constitution provides 4 initiators for amendments: the President of the Republic, the government, at least 30 members of parliament and 150,000 citizens. It is clear that neither our neighbors nor the European Union are authorized proposers of amendments. We emphasize that conditioning the start of negotiations to new constitutional amendments once again reopens issues of history, culture and language, questions we have been assured were settled by the Prespa agreement with Greece. We are constantly reminded that agreements must be respected. Pacta sunt servanda. I agree. We note that the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness and Cooperation with Bulgaria contains no provisions for constitutional amendments. Finally, through the Constitutive Acts, the EU defines itself as a unity of diversity and commits to respecting cultural and linguistic diversity, national and cultural identity, and dignity and integrity. How then is it possible that we are asked to discuss and negotiate with a neighbor about history, culture, and language? Time and again, we stress that we perceive ourselves as Europeans and deeply believe in the European project that brought peace and economic prosperity after the Second World War. The European ideal remains our greatest inspiration and strategic aspiration. As a country dedicated to good neighborly relations and regional cooperation, we do not seek disputes with our neighbors. What we desire is to be integrated in the Union, but without additional conditions and with national dignity preserved. We warn that the After the war in Ukraine, the blocked European integration of the Western Balkan is not only a political, but also a security issue. With the political door closed for the Western Balkan countries and the door wide open for influences of third geopolitical centers of power, it is ironic that the Union calls for resilience towards them. Must we end up on the Security Council's agenda for the EU to unblock enlargement? If the European Union wants to be a geopolitical union, it must not leave the Western Balkans in a geopolitical vacuum. As the President of the European Commission has noted, the European Union must break the armor of consensus as soon as possible if it wants to complete the reunification of Europe and become a strong geopolitical factor again. Madam President, esteemed Excellencies, finally, I cannot but not address one of the most geopolitically volatile regions, the Middle East and Gaza. The Middle East has an ancient and rich tradition of inter-religious and inter-ethnic coexistence. History has shown that diversity, when respected, can be a source of cultural enrichment and long-term peace. But also history teaches that violence, regardless of its origin, deepens divisions, prolongs human suffering, and distances the parties from a just and comprehensive solution. We are convinced that sustainable peace in the Middle East can only be achieved through dialogue and diplomacy, in accord with international law. The inviolability of human life and dignity must be respected, even in times of war, in accord with international humanitarian law. In that spirit, we reaffirm our support for international efforts aimed at de-escalation, inclusive dialogue, and direct negotiations. Esteemed Excellencies, these geopolitical fault lines and tensions point unequivocally to the following. Without multilateral institutions and procedures, without international law and principles that would tame the strong and protect the weak, we will reenact the Thucydides Melian dialogue, with the strong doing what they can and the weak what they must. Consider how repeated violations of the United Nations Charter were tolerated, clearing the path for new ones. Remember the General Assembly resolutions left unenforced, the International Court of Justice's judgments disregarded and its opinions ignored, and the peace initiatives obstructed in the Security Council. Facing with the dysfunction of the current international order, some realists advise forgetting international treaties and conventions as a needless burden and seeking shelter in regional blocs and alliances. For them, the fastest and best way to resolve crisis is outside the United Nations without a Security Council mandate. However, departing from universal principles and mechanisms in favor of pragmatic opportunism and reaching for ad hoc measures pushes us towards an uncertain future of growing geopolitical and geoeconomic competition and even confrontation in the race for resources. Is that the harsh world we mean to leave to our posterity? The alternative is to try to revitalize multilateralism and make its institutions more resilient to these systemic shocks. Respected Madam President, respected attendees, young generations have the right to a renewed charter, to a reformed and strong United Nations that will enable them to live in peace among nations and peace with nature. These reforms must not be cosmetic, but profound, to enable greater inclusiveness, harmonization between values and mechanisms, optimization of national and global interests, and functional institutions. The UN reforms depend on whether they are seen as an opportunity to renew the rules-based international order or as a challenge to the privileges of some member states. Yet, what is the point of being a privileged member state of a dysfunctional irrelevant, marginalized international organization. For effective United Nations, it is necessary for the Security Council to be reformed, to be more inclusive, accountable, and responsible for maintaining international peace and security. The General Assembly must evolve into a representative policy-making body rather than a debate club. The implementation of International Court of Justice judgments must become mandatory for all member states, ensuring the rule of international law. Reform is needed not only for all challenges, but also for new ones. Artificial intelligence brings enormous opportunities, but also incalculable risks for our civilization. It is not just a technological leap. Its impact may be greater than the industrial and digital revolutions. Aware of this, my country and I support the proposal to make artificial intelligence a priority of the 80th session. Next year, we will elect a new Secretary General of the United Nations. We need a person with leadership skills, with rich diplomatic experience, and ability to bring differences and build consensus, but also deeply humane and committed to the vulnerable. The next top diplomat of the world must possess knowledge, patience, and tact. After 8 years, it is high time for a woman to be a Secretary General of the United Nations. In a world dominated by strong men, often with weapons, we need strong women with wisdom and empathy. I believe that women who are, along with their children, are the greatest and most numerous victims of wars, have an inalienable right and obligation to prevent them. The anarchic international order is a threat to all, but especially to small states. It is natural for small and medium-sized states to be the greatest supporters of the United Nations reforms. Distinguished Excellencies, let me share with you what we are doing in this regard. We supported the adoption of the Pact for the Future as a new global social contract. Living in one of the most climate-vulnerable regions in the world, the Mediterranean, Macedonian citizens are already experiencing the consequences of the climate crisis, such as extreme weather conditions. That is why we supported the implementation of the Paris Agreement at COP29 in Baku. We supported the Sevilla commitment on financing for development and integrated the Sustainable Development Goals in our National Development Strategy 2024-2044. At the third UN Ocean Conference in Nice, we committed to strong international ocean governance supporting the action plan. We are making great efforts to promote women's leadership and the implementation of the Agenda on Women, Peace and Security. We signed the new 2026-2030 framework for cooperation with the United Nations to ensure inclusive social and human development, sustainable economies and decent work, resilient and green societies and ecosystems, the rule of law and good governance. Esteemed Excellencies, we are standing in front of a great test. Either we will guarantee an international order based on visionary principles, or we will rush towards a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions for humanity. Former Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld reminded us that the United Nations was not created in order to bring us to heaven, but in order to save us from hell. We should recognize the United Nations for what it is: an admittedly imperfect but indispensable instrument of nations in working for peaceful evolution towards a more just and secure world order. Let's give them that chance. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Macedonia. L'Assemblée va entendre l'allocution de son...
The Assembly will now hear the statement of His Excellency, Mr. Anthony from Laurent, Saint-Cyr, President of the Presidential Transition Council of the Republic of Haiti. I request Protocol to accompany His Excellency, and I invite him to speak before the Assembly.
Madame la Présidente de la
Madam President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, distinguished heads of state and government, distinguished heads of delegation, distinguished delegates, it's with a sense of gravity and a great deal of hope that I convey the voice of Haiti and the greetings of a dignified and resilient people, which, despite hardships, is claiming for itself and for all of humanity 3 universal promises: development, respect for human dignity, and peace. Peace, which is now an absolute imperative for the Haitian people. On behalf of this people, Madam President, I would like to warmly congratulate you on your election as President of this Assembly. I also would like to thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his unwavering commitment to our organization and his constant and multifaceted support for the Republic of Haiti. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this session, Better Together, 80 Years and More for Peace, Development, and Human Rights, honors the outstanding work carried out over the past decades. It also recalls the importance of remaining unified and resilient in the face of the unprecedented crises threatening the future of the planet, as well as international peace and security. Today, hunger is threatening millions of lives. Armed conflicts are multiplying and extreme poverty is deepening, causing forced migrations that jeopardize international stability and that put the solidarity between nations to the test. In addition to these challenges, we also are dealing with climate change, a rise of terrorism, mass atrocities, transnational crime, the erosion of human rights, and disinformation. We cannot turn a blind eye to the urgent need to strengthen our healthcare systems, to ensure a just energy transition, and to promote gender equality and youth inclusion. These issues require us, the world leaders, to shoulder our responsibility to build a UN that is better adapted to the challenges of today and the hopes of tomorrow. We must ensure that all of our actions, including technological breakthroughs such as artificial intelligence, foster peace, development, and human dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, just a 4-hour plane ride from here, a human tragedy is unfolding, one of the most devastating of our hemisphere. Every day, innocent lives are extinguished by bullets, fire, fear. Entire neighborhoods are disappearing, forcing more than 1 million people into internal exile and annihilating memories, investment, and infrastructure. Thousands of children have been deprived of their fundamental right to education. Thousands of young people are condemned to despair. Hundreds of women and girls have been raped, and they will forever carry the scars of this violence in their bodies and souls. Almost half of the population is facing acute food insecurity. The healthcare system is collapsing. Hospitals are being vandalized, burned, or forced to shut down. Doctors are fleeing. Lives are being lost due to a lack of treatment. Even the treatment for persons living with HIV and tuberculosis is under threat. This is the face of Haiti today, a country at war, a modern-day Guernica, a human tragedy at the doorstep of America. Only a 4-hour flight from here. It's important to say this. Haiti is experiencing war, a war between criminals that want to impose violence as their social order and a population, an unarmed population that is fighting for human dignity and freedom. The response must be firm and determined. Today, the international community must stand alongside Haiti and take large-scale measures, not half steps. A strong, coordinated, and immediate action is needed. Silence and inaction are not an option. We must act quickly to protect lives, to protect the innocence of children, to provide youth with a future, and to allow citizens to decide their own future at the voting booth. Every minute lost means human lives sacrificed, and an erosion of democracy. Haiti wants peace. Haiti expects peace. Haiti has the right to peace. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, peace today is the most pressing need of the Haitian people. It is the raison d'etre behind our tireless battle, the battle between our security forces, led by our security forces and the multinational security support mission. Many policemen and soldiers have fallen in the war against criminal groups. We pay tribute to these heroes, Haitian and Kenyan, who have laid down their lives for their commitment to restoring peace and security in Haiti. Today, out of the 2,500 troops initially required and promised, there are only 1,000 members of the multinational mission on the ground. Their courage, combined with our own efforts, have not been sufficient to contain the security crisis. And yet we have increased by 40% the budget for our security forces. We've recruited new members. We have strengthened our troops and acquired more material and equipment. We must face the reality. Haiti is at the epicenter of an unprecedented regional threat. Powerful and heavily armed criminal networks are trying to destabilize our country and take over the economies of our entire common space. The new front lines of this battle are in our country, in Haiti. If we lose this battle on our soil, it will be futile to try to contain it in the rest of the region. That is why we must show the same determination, the same resolve, and the same unity that we showed in the fight against terrorism. Haiti could never overcome this challenge single-handedly. Today, it is crucial to mobilize a strong force with a clear mandate and with adequate material, logistical, and financial resources. In this regard, the lessons of the MMS and recommendations of Haitian experts must be taken into account. We also need heightened international cooperation based on intelligence sharing and on rigorous border control to curb the flow of arms, ammunition, drugs, and financing toward these gangs. Peace cannot be restored unless our regional partners take concrete measures to ensure their territories do not serve as a starting point or a transit hub for this kind of trafficking. Approaches that failed yesterday will not save Haiti today. It is critical to listen to the voice of the Haitian people, to try new solutions that are stronger and more adapted to the realities on the ground. In this regard, we fully support the efforts made to transform the multinational security support mission. We also call for solidarity from the entire international community, especially for the commitment of members of the Security Council for a vote in favor of the resolution establishing a gang suppression force. That is why I would like to express on behalf of the Haitian people my profound gratitude to the United States and to Panama for this initiative, the implementation of which will mark a turning point in our fight against insecurity, which is suffocating our nation. I thank the administration of President Trump for the efforts made to provide support and resources in our common fight against the gangs, these enemies that are threatening both Haiti and the entire region. Today, the complexity of the Haitian crisis cannot serve as a pretext for endless talk, for drawn-out negotiations, or for stalemates caused by geopolitical considerations. Every day that we hesitate, criminal groups benefit. We urgently need to be proactive, to transcend divisions, to act together, to promote the values that bring us together, peace and human dignity. Haiti would welcome the holding of a high-level meeting to overcome obstacles and to make tangible progress. In this regard, we welcome the countries of the region and thank them for their constant support, especially through declarations in various regional organizations, including the Organization of American States and CARICOM. We appreciate their support and advocacy with partners in the Security Council for a real solution to the security crisis in Haiti. We also pay tribute to all of those states which during previous crises stood by our side and express the hope to be able to count once again on their commitment. Together, we can and we must resolve this crisis which has lasted for too long already. 12 million women, men, and children are expecting this of us. Ladies and gentlemen, the Presidential Transition Council was born of a political consensus that stemmed from intense negotiations between the nation's political parties. This council, established which was supported by various international partners and facilitated by leaders of CARICOM, has a clear agenda which centers on holding free and credible elections. I repeat, free and credible elections. Despite the many challenges caused by the security crisis, the electoral process, for which the PTC and the government have shown real political will, has made real headway. The Electoral Council, Provisional Electoral Council, has already identified more than 85% of the voting centers, mobilized more than 70% of the elections personnel, and national financing to the tune of $65 million is guaranteed. The Presidential Transition Council is working closely with the MMS, the OAS, CARICOM, and BNU to ensure free, transparent, and inclusive elections reflecting the sovereign will of the Haitian people and guaranteeing the full and effective participation of young people, women, people with disabilities, and marginalized groups. To ensure productive political cooperation, constant efforts are being made and will continue to expand dialogue with the various political parties to strengthen consensus and to prevent a power vacuum which would be fatal for democracy and stability. The Haitian people must be able to choose its own leaders. The state wants credible elections. Our greatest challenge remains restoring security. The urgent and solemn call that we have once again issued to resolve the security crisis in Haiti must not be left to languish on paper nor be lost amid rhetoric and unkept promises. In Haiti, peace can no longer wait. Ladies and gentlemen, the transitional period does not allow us to launch all of the major structural reforms the country needs, but the humanitarian crisis we are currently experiencing must be overcome. To this day, the Haitian state has provided 72% of emergency assistance for IDPs and is assisting families to relocate. We are profoundly grateful to our international partners that have assisted us in the humanitarian response, and we are keenly interested in the promising initiatives put forward by those which, like the Association of Caribbean States, have chosen to join our effort. But our strategy is not limited to immediate assistance. We must move from assistance to investment. To this end, the government is determined to develop two major economic hubs, the Great North and the Great South, based on strategic sectors such as agro-industry, textiles, renewable energy, tourism, and services. Haiti will continue to count on its key partners to weather this difficult period and to relaunch its economy. We call for their support through the establishment of concrete mechanisms such as the renewal of the Hope Help Law, or launching urban renovation projects which will allow us to create jobs, to put an end to the humanitarian impasse, and to reduce migration pressure on Haitians in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, 2025 marks the bicentennial of the order forcing Haiti to pay a ransom for recognizing its own independence. We call for reparations, not out of bitterness or vengefulness, but out of a desire for justice and truth. We delivered with satisfaction the statement by the French presidency recognizing the need to open spaces for dialogue and historic truth, as well as the resolution of June 5, 2025 of the French National Assembly recognizing the injustice of this ransom. Haiti has established a National Reparations and Restitution Committee. We call for this progress to be accompanied by concrete action. France, which is the cradle of human rights, today has the opportunity to write a new chapter in its history with Haiti by honoring the ideals of freedom, equality, and fraternity that unite us. Ladies and gentlemen, I must underscore the invaluable support provided by the Haitian diaspora throughout the world, who are often living in hardship. Whether in America, in Europe, in Africa, or elsewhere, the millions of Haitians living abroad contribute to the development of Haiti. We are undergoing a multidimensional crisis, and we call for patience and understanding from our partners and friends so that our nationals are always treated with respect and dignity. Behind every migrant there is a face, a family, a history, and a contribution to be made to their new country of residence. Haiti reaffirms its commitment to dialogue and to bilateral cooperation in the spirit of neighborliness and mutual respect to identify balanced and long-term solutions to Haiti's problems. The safe and orderly circulation of goods and of people, especially through air transport, is crucial for a shared future and common prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, the Haiti of tomorrow deserves peace and prosperity, a future based on an independent judiciary, universal education, affordable health care for all, and an economy that provides every citizen with the same chance at success. This future also requires bold reforms, independent justice, and an end to impunity. On April 16, 2025, we enacted a decree establishing two specialized judiciary bodies, one to litigate crimes and complex financial infractions, and another to prosecute mass atrocities and sexual violence. We're making progress toward making these bodies operational. We are prepared to continue down this path. This is not the time for Haiti fatigue. The international community does not have the right to turn away from Haiti's situation. In light of this crisis, silence would not be neutrality, it would be complicity. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to pay tribute to the Haitian people. Representing them here is the greatest honor of my life. Beyond my functions as president of the Presidential Transition Council of Haiti, I am a real, active Haitian citizen with a profound love for my homeland, a land of freedom and dignity, a land of courage and talent. Haiti is not a nation that has given up. We are a great people, a people that stands together, men and women who have sacrificed for their homeland and for humanity. Haiti is not a playground for armed criminals. Rather, it is a nation on its feet, comprised of dignified, resilient families who every day, despite terrible adversity, are fighting for a better future. I pay tribute to my fellow countrymen and women who are, without a doubt, among the most resilient people on earth. They deserve better. Giving them new hope is my only mission, and that is why now I call upon you to stand side by side with Haiti. We must build peace in Haiti, for the Caribbean, for the Americas, for all of humanity. Thank you.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale,
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Presidential Council of the Transition of the Republic of Haiti.
An address by His Excellency Mikheil Kavelashvili, President of Georgia. I request protocol to score His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly. I can see it here. Yeah.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I represent a country with a 3,000-year history, the cradle of one of the world's most ancient civilizations and the brave Georgian people, filled with pride and dignity, a country that possesses a unique alphabet, an ancient language, and 17th century-long Christian traditions. The history of Georgia is continuous chronicle of our people's struggle for survival against invaders, through which we have miraculously managed to preserve our cultural identity, traditions, and national character. Despite centuries of continuous warfare with invaders, the cultural environment in Georgia has always been distinguished by exceptional humanism, tolerance, and compassion for others. Tolerance, openness to others, harmonious coexistence, and diversity form the cornerstone of our ancient culture. which is brilliantly reflected in Georgian polyphony, in our national traditions, and in the world-renowned Georgian epic Shota Rustaveli's The Knight in the Panther Skin. Georgia is a place where, throughout history, no human has ever been oppressed or persecuted on ethnic or religious grounds. Quite the opposite. We have always been known for our profound sense of justice. I represent the Georgian people, who know both the cost of war and the value of freedom and peace, a people who cherish their rich history and traditions, while at the same time facing with resolve the challenges that lie before our country. Amid a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape and unprecedented global challenges, such as ongoing conflicts, climate change, ideological polarization, cultural alienation, and war-driven humanitarian crisis, Georgia stands firmly as a guardian of dialogue, peace, stability, and sustainable development. Despite the many challenges surrounding us, we have managed to ensure the security of our people. The fundamental philosophy of the Georgian government remains to preserve peace, and no matter the cost, to spare our people from war. For the fourth year now, a horrific, bloody war has been raging in Ukraine, bringing catastrophic consequences and immense human suffering. Drawing on the bitter experience of the 2008 war, whose wounds have not yet healed for the Georgian people, we understand better than many the pain that Ukrainian nation endures today. Now as before, Georgia expresses its firm and unwavering support for Ukrainian people. As we deeply understand the importance of peace, Georgia contributes to the transformation of the South Caucasus and strives to turn it from a zone of conflicts into a space of dialogue among civilizations and economic prosperity. We welcome President Donald Trump's peace initiative between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as his efforts to bring the bloody war between Russia and Ukraine to an end soon. Georgia has always supported and actively strived to establish sustainable and long-term peace in the South Caucasus, as well as to deepen trust and cooperation amongst its neighbors. For centuries, our country has been a crossroads of civilization and a space for dialogue among diverse cultures. Today, Georgia is reclaiming its historical role. Close relations with the countries of the South Caucasus and Central Asia, existing agreements with the European Union, and the Georgia's key position in the Middle Corridor all give our country a special significance, both within the region and across the Eurasian continent. Georgia is the shortest connecting route and natural bridge between Europe and Asia, the West and the East. Thanks to our geographical location and pragmatic foreign policy, Georgia is emerging as a multidimensional and multifunctional regional hub, both in terms of trade and energy transit. Georgia makes a significant contribution to the development of the Middle Corridor strategic route and does everything to ensure that the corridor becomes the fastest, most reliable, and most stable connecting route between East and West. We are actively working with international investors, developing infrastructure and facilitating the creation of new energy transit routes, all of which ultimately enhance the connectivity between Asian and European markets. Within the framework of the Middle Corridor and its development, Georgia has launched strategically significant projects aimed at increasing the volume and intensity of rail, sea, and air transportation. Among them, the railway modernization project has already been completed, while work is actively underway on the deep sea port in Anaklia, the new international airport in Tbilisi, and the Black Sea submarine cable projects. These projects, on one hand, provide landlocked countries in Central Asia and the South Caucasus with maritime connectivity to the rest of the world. On the other hand, the projects are implementing help diversity energy routes. We are implementing help diversity energy routes, thereby significantly enhancing the energy security of Europe and South Caucasus. to promote the development of the Middle Corridor and enhance connectivity between the two largest markets, Asia and Europe. Georgia has been hosting the Tbilisi Silk Road Forum for 8 years. It is an international platform for dialogue and new opportunities, attended up to 2,000 delegates from 60 countries. Our goal is to develop constructive relations based on mutual respect and shared benefits with major economies such as the United States, China, European Union, and others. We are open to any dialogue and cooperation, but at the same time, we demand respect and fair and dignified approach. What the Georgian people will never accept is being spoken to in the language of ultimatums, blackmail, or intimidation. Georgia is a faithful adherent to the fundamental principles of values of the United Nations and a dignified, responsible member of the international community, as evidenced by the considerable efforts by the current government of Georgia to improve the protection of human rights. It is precisely thanks to the pragmatic and rational policies of the government of Georgia that we have maintained peace and economic growth, significantly improving the quality of life of our citizens. Despite numerous challenges in recent years, Georgia has demonstrated remarkable resilience to external shocks. The positive trajectory of Georgia's development is reflected in and confirmed by the international rankings and indicators of the world's most reputable organizations. Despite 20% of Georgia's territory remaining under occupation, we continue to pursue development and progress with great energy and determination. We are entrusted with the mission that our children may live in a stronger, dignified Georgia and peaceful world. And now I want to address our Abkhaz and Ossetian brothers and sisters on the other side of the occupation line. For centuries, we have written Georgia's history together, a history filled with the heroism of our ancestors through our shared struggle for survival of our nation and the love for our motherland. We have never been a large empire imposing its rules on the others. We have always been a country proud of its diversity. Georgia is a place where civilizations have met, blended and balanced each other for centuries. Our culture is the very product of this complex and enduring synthesis. My Abkhaz and Ossetian brothers and sisters, our cultural code has not changed. For us, diversity is not a problem. It remains an essential formula for our existence, which is why we always meet our compatriots from the other side of the occupation line with open hearts and outstretched hands. It's our duty through joint efforts to overcome artificially created obstacles, rebuild broken bridges, and leave past grievances to history as a people of exceptional patience and resilience. I believe that one day we will, together with our children, we will live with our children in a united, happy, and developed Georgia, where nothing will stand in the way of our harmonious coexistence. Herewith, I would like to express my gratitude to the international community for its unwavering support of Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Georgia, like the entire world, is going through a pivotal moment in modern history. We live in a transitional era where the future of the international order remains uncertain. The United Nations must ensure our planet's transition to a peaceful, stable, and fair, multipolar international order. Georgia is responsible, as a responsible member of international community, is ready to support the United Nations in becoming the inevitable alternative to war and the principal guarantor of peace. I would like to reiterate that we are prepared and open, taking into account our national interests, to engage in dialogue with all parties on issues of global and regional significance. The current reality requires us to face difficult issues and initiate an open, pragmatic, and result-oriented dialogue. I believe that only in this way we can overcome common global challenges and unlock new opportunities for the benefit of our countries, peoples, and future generations. Thank you very much for your attention. May God bless humanity.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Georgia. La Asamblea escuchará.
The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Luis Alberto Arce Catacora, Constitutional President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Muy buenos días.
A very good morning to all of you. Allow me to express brotherly greetings to the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Annalena Baerbock, and through her to the entire Assembly. The 80th session isn't just any other date. It is a space for a historic time which invites us to stop and to look back, to remember why this organization was born and why it has seen the results that humanity was waiting for after the 2 world wars in which the fight for wealth and areas of influence left in its wake millions of dead, displaced and wounded. We are living with a wound that we're trying to overlook. Over 8 decades, in the concert of nations, we have seen the development of narratives that, using the skill of the great powers with long-standing experience in the international community, have camouflaged deep wounds and the devastating memories of humanity. They've done so using smart normative texts that pretend to be the duty of the United Nations through audiovisuals and others that are not very effective in facing flagrant problems such as neocolonialism in all of its expressions, territorial occupation, economic, political and cultural interference, racism, discrimination, the arms race and violence which is implicit in all of this without taking into account other aspects such as hunger, climate change, the food crisis and the increasingly frequent economic crises. The effects of these realities are clear to all. Confrontations and discourse that promotes hatred and division between kindred states, inequality, exclusion, poverty and inequality and injustice, still produced within institutions that were created to protect the rights of the weakest. And we're not even talking about economic, social and the cultural rights of people, and even more if you look at the rights of indigenous peoples. A sincere assessment leads us to confirm that in 80 years we have not met the expected results. Consequently, we are not in a good position. The world remains divided and confronted against itself more than 80 years ago. Today in the world there is greater inequality in the distribution of wealth than there was 80 years ago. The poverty figures, inequality and injustice, rather than being curbed, is on the increase. The risk that any remaining peace should disappear and the Third World War would overtake the entire planet is very close if we don't react in time. The danger here is that the unstoppable force of capitalism with the misuse of artificial intelligence would increase the climate change, would liquidate the planet and would convert the immense majority of the population into unnecessary beings is also something that we can't completely rule out. We're not in a good place. The UN was established on the basis of the foundations of the skeletons of the Holocaust and the not only physical but also moral ruins left by the fascist racism and also increasing neocolonialism with the use of 2 atomic bombs. One of the goals that gave rise to the United Nations was to not repeat the barbarity of war. Today we hear the echoes of the drums of war on all continents. We see the practice of genocide on the sole decision of 2 countries. We deny the right to be free and sovereign to a people. Sophisticated weapons are used against a sovereign country, and increasing militarization is being promoted within a region with double standards in combating the war on drugs. And at the same time, we maintain a criminal blockade against its people and the state for the sole crime of having claimed its own independence more than 6 decades ago. Wars are not the same as we had 80 years ago. Wars now are multidimensional. They use economic, financial, media, information, cyber warfare, without even taking into account military warfare, which now encompasses biological warfare, war from space, and other technologies that continue to be developed with impunity on the basis of technology of war. It would be nothing new to have climate wars that would have an impact on sovereignty and food security, jeopardizing strategic resources such as water. We are putting at risk the very survival of the human race on Earth and of life itself on the planet. Just taking off the mask from all of these tragedies, we can see that the cause of all of this is the wild capitalist system that places the greed of the few over the rights and lives of the majority on the planet. The cause of this is the current capitalist development, which tries to resolve its own crisis and ends up returning to the original forms of accumulation and increasing rates of profit. Capitalism and its imperialist face is once again using the deployment of violence, plundering natural resources from sovereign states, and with bloodletting to lead to the political and economic power and take that away from another. Added to that, we have a third cause of the current wars, which is more immediate. That is the obsessive zeal of the new Trump administration to give the United States back its position as a hegemonic power at the cost of the liberal system, free trade, globalization, and to cause pain and death. Why? For what? To take ownership over natural resources, to take control over commodities for the benefit of an imperialist system, and to subordinate the majority of countries for their insatiable thirst for privilege and wealth, and to try to maintain a unipolar order at any cost. The recent publication of the US Strategic Defense Policy sets out a deployment of its troops around the world to in its areas of influence, Canada, Central and South America, among others. The recent history with our neighbours has made us realise this is nothing else but a new way of implementing Monroeism, which was a doctrine which said that America is for the North Americans, generating conditions for a new era of neocolonialism. Madam President, distinguished heads of state and government, from the indigenous name for Latin America and the Caribbean, we can say that we are a zone of peace, and we did so at the second summit of CELAC in Havana in 2014. The nations in our region are complying with this mandate that we set ourselves, still bearing in mind our political and ideological differences on various topics and with regard to border and territorial occupation-based disputes that remain ongoing. We can say, when we invert the equation of the Pentagon, that it is peace rather than war that guides our international relations. In hearing this declaration statement in 2022 in this same place, I came to appeal to the United Nations for a General Assembly to declare to the world that it would be an entire territory of peace. And 11 years have passed since that historic declaration of CELAC, and 3 years since I made that statement in this assembly. Not only have we not declared the world as a zone of peace, rather we are facing the harsh reality of seeing how death is becoming increasingly normalized in international relations. We also feel the threat of fascism in all of its variants to try to exploit and dominate peoples at the current time. The threat of death has made is covering Latin America and the Caribbean. We are seeing a bellicose potential, which would even go so far as to use missiles, submarines, helicopters, using the pretext that this maritime space is being used against the national security of the United States through the illegal introduction of cocaine through illegal gangs belonging to drug cartels. Beyond violations of international law, this provocative action of imperialism has two intentions. First, to intervene into our kindred Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela that since 1999 has been raising high the flags of the freedom of its people and the sovereignty of its state, and which possesses considerable natural resources, particularly in oil, which the North wishes to appropriate and claim. Secondly, to try to reconquer the Latin America and the Caribbean on the basis of it undermining liberal democracy, to impose militarization and to use other colonialist practices that we should call out. Imperialism is said to be used to combat drugs trafficking. This is a fallacy, because if this were true, it would actually be taking effect within their own country, where the demand for this type of drugs is high, and where in its origins, where we see different types of organized crime. What the United States is trying to do is to give our region the role of holding back the edification of a multipolar world and to submit it to its own interests. Added to these military actions, the images of which have been seen around the world, we see other types of devastating actions, such as those aimed at strengthening the economic blockade against Cuba. Billions of dollars are owed by the United States to the Cuban state due to these unilateral coercive measures, which are explained on the basis of rejecting the first communist revolution, which will never be destroyed. The threat of death is also afflicting the Middle East. In the Middle East, the pain of millions of families and the death of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians finds no consolation. All of this history tells us has the unconditional support of the United States, which wants to speed up the displacement of the Palestinian people as quickly as possible. peace will be an empty world while the Palestinian people continues to face practices of genocide and does not have its own land and full sovereignty with East Jerusalem as its capital. But in this region, that's not the only thing that's happening. The fragile political and geopolitical stability is threatened by preventive attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran and against the small nation of Yemen, very similarly to what is happening, what was done by ex-President George Bush. The threat of death is also clear in Eurasia. In Eurasia, despite the intermittent attempts to achieve a political outcome, the expansionist ambitions of NATO, which is nothing else than the military arm of concentrated capital, is trying to protract the military conflict by using Ukraine as a launch pad against the Russian Federation. The threat of death also hangs over Asia. The East China Sea, which is an area